the third season of House of the Dragon got off to a flying start. Battles, intrigues, and the deaths of important characters are supposed to bring back the vibe of the good old Game of Thrones. For a long time, the relatively small area of Westeros between Driftmark, Dragonstone, and King's Landing was locked in a blockade of the Blackwater Bay, and now a real stew is boiling there. According to the recipe, 100 ships, a few dragons with riders, the dreams and hopes of Queen Rhaenyra, as well as the fears of the King's Landing inhabitants were thrown into the boiling water. To set the stage, let's define 3 theaters of action. The events in each of them get a rapid resolution in the second season. The first theater is King's Landing, where they don't quite know what to do, since on the one hand King Aegon has disappeared, and on the other hand, Aemond has already sent Criston Cole ahead and promised him a reunion with the vanguard in the Riverlands. Now, with the prince flying off on Vhagar, there will be no ruler left in King's Landing, meaning come and take the Iron Throne, sisters, nephews, uncle. The second theater of action is, of course, the Riverlands. In the west of the region, sweet dreams, strange negotiations, and final troop gatherings should lead to a clash with the Lannisters. And we are shown a series of confrontations in a way. We can say right away that everything is described much more richly in the book, so focusing on the book sources, we will try to fill in the picture. Finally, the most interesting theater of action unfolds in the Gullet. The ships of the Triarchy sail there. Let's recall, Tywin Lannister negotiated the attack. The Greens need to lift the blockade of the capital, as it has ceased to be functional. The small folk are starving, and it's all because the strait to the capital is blocked by Corlys Velaryon's ships and dragons. Finally, at times they show the expanse where Lord Ormond Hightower begins his march to the capital. The road won't seem easy, and showrunner Ryan Condal compared Ormond to Tywin Lannister, who, though, was hardly afraid of bad smells and bad news. The first shots of the episode are aimed at changing the mood of the narrative. We see an updated intro. New tapestries appear. Good idea, but even more interesting is that new motifs sound in the theme itself. Ramin Djawadi added drums, thus indicating a change in the atmosphere of the entire series with an emphasis on combat. The first part of the episode shows us the interactions of Rhaenyra and Alicent with their sons. 2 seasons paved the way for a setup where Rhaenyra acted as an excellent mother, despite the sins of her youth, while the also-proper Alicent couldn't manage her children. But at the crucial moment, Aemond listens to his mother and avoids the ambush, while Jacaerys goes against mother's will and gets into trouble. By the way, about the sons. The long-awaited Daeron finally appears on screen. However, some viewers hardly recognize the young man, since his hair is chestnut, unlike his older brothers. But it is the third son of Viserys and Alicent who serves as an aide to Lord Hightower. He still has to prove himself. The adaptation expands Aegon's story, since there are few details about his escape from King's Landing in the books. However, it can be stated for sure that the reason in Fire and Blood is the real threat from the Blacks, not the fear of his younger brother. Aemond is now positioned as the king, but he is also the most valuable combat asset on the Green's side. True, as a result of the events at the end of the second and the beginning of the third seasons, it's not entirely clear what the Greens even are anymore. With Otto's disappearance, the unity in their camp is completely gone. Very fascinating events on the borders of the Western Riverlands were left almost entirely off-screen. We were only shown the conclusion of the battle involving the Lannisters, the Riverlords, and the Winter Wolves, as well as Prince Daemon and Caraxes. What is shown is very difficult to reconcile with the events in the book version. In general, the book confrontation is very similar in character to Robb Stark's battle during the War of the Five Kings, where he dragged Tywin into minor skirmishes and won. And it all happens in roughly the same locations. According to the book plot, Jason Lannister's army of 8,000 well-equipped warriors advanced eastward deep into enemy territory. When crossing the Red Fork, the combined forces of the Riverlords loyal to Queen Rhaenyra, commanded by Lords Peter Piper and Tristan Vance, opposed them. The river troops fortified themselves on the opposite bank and used the river as a natural defensive moat. Thus, Jason's main striking force in the form of heavy cavalry was neutralized. 3 times the knights and infantry of the West, clad in steel, tried to force the Red Fork under a continuous hail of arrows, crossbow bolts, and spears, and 3 times they were thrown back into the river with colossal losses. During the third most desperate attempt to break the enemy defenses, Jason decided to inspire the wavering troops and personally led them in an attack across the ford. A squire named Pate inflicted a mortal wound on Lord Jason. Impressed by Pate's valor, the river lords paid him honors. Right on the battlefield, Lord Peter Piper knighted him and gave him the nickname Lion's Lair. However, as soon as the Lannister lord fell into the water, command of the demoralized army was taken over by Adrian Tarbeck. He devised, prepared, and executed a bold maneuver. Tarbeck selected 100 of the best and most desperate knights of the West, ordered them to take off their heavy plate armor and secretly swim across the river far upstream, out of sight of the ford's defenders. On the eastern bank, the light mobile detachment made a swift flanking maneuver and furiously struck the unprotected rear of Lord Vance's troops. The sudden strike from the rear sowed absolute panic in the ranks of the river men. Lord Vance fell in battle by the hand of Adrian himself, and the defensive lines crumbled. The Western warriors swept away the remnants of the resistance and moved on, while Jason died in the marching camp almost immediately. These events are just a small part of the plot of a very important confrontation in the Riverlands. In the series, however, it's as if they presented the decisive battle, completely dumping this storyline. Given the participation of Oscar Tully, Roderick Dustin, and Prince Daemon, they showed us the outcome of the general battle, where the Western army is completely defeated. In future battles, a number of characters should have a history, an attachment from the viewers, but so far there is no idea about the Winter Wolves, Pate, and the young growth of river warriors. A major omission, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure that any other battles will be shown in any volume either. The Battle of the Gullet is much more similar to the book version, but there are also striking differences here. In Fire and Blood, Jacaerys appears as a sort of Robb Stark. He gives a lot of orders on Dragonstone, is the ideologist of sowing the dragon seeds, and his leadership role looks natural. In the series, after Rhaenyra's diplomatic successes, she removes her son from command because she is afraid to lose him. Actually, the screen version is logical in its own way, but the final loss of Jacaerys doesn't look as sad as in the case of Baelor in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, or Robb Stark himself in Game of Thrones. The Blacks lost another heir, a dragon rider, but not a leader and their hope. Also left off-screen were the events with Rhaenyra's younger sons. In the books, their little ship collided with the Triarchy fleet and the consequences were horrifying. But let's say a couple of words about the battle itself. It is quite difficult to assess the initial balance of power. The Triarchy side had numerical superiority, surprise, and also readiness to meet dragons. Lord Corlys, on the other hand, excelled in experience, the combat focus of his fleet, and excellent knowledge of the area. It seems to me that they failed to create a sense of scale, since they focused on the confrontation between Lohar and Corlys, as well as on the dragons. Basically, this emphasis had the right to exist. In the books, the advantage from the participation of dragons in the battle made the accompanying losses very offensive. It seemed that the Triarchy fleet could simply be burned, since the attackers didn't know the number of dragons the Blacks had. The showrunners removed Vermithor and Silverwing from the battle, and the influence of the flying lizards was significantly reduced. Jace and Baela simply equalized the odds at sea, and then switched to flying with Rhaena on Sheepstealer. By the way, essentially, her appearance led to Jacaerys' carelessness and the prince's final end. The admirals of both sides eventually abandoned their respective fleets and decided to compete in maneuvering skills, and then in hand-to-hand combat. In general, the ships sailing in shallow waters looked interesting and the brawl turned out beautiful, and the victory can be given to the Black side. However, the Triarchy fleet acted only as an external force and heavily battered Dragonstone. The blockade became less effective, Rhaenyra lost a good dragon, and most importantly, a relatively adult heir. In any case, the battles on the ship decks, dragon flights, the scene with Jace's death, and the personal fights of the main characters look good. Perhaps only a few wide shots were missing, since they could easily be demonstrated from Baela's or Jace's perspective. The chaos of a sudden attack is conveyed, when it is difficult for the defenders to quickly come up with a good strategic plan. We also see Corlys' tactical genius, although his berserker abilities are surprising, since the combat grandpa is already well over 70 years old at the time of the events. At such a venerable age, it's hard to even wear armor, especially since they were singing songs and drinking wine with Alan in the cabin. In general, I am glad about the return of the series. Amidst the semi-battles, There was room for the wonderful acting of Emma Darcy, Olivia Cooke, and Ewan Mitchell. By the way, we won't discuss their central scene here. The density of further events will in any case maintain a high intensity of action. Much will be similar in atmosphere to the Battle of the Gullet. Hardly anyone will mourn Jason for long. By the way, Tyland is supposed to drown, since heavy armor pulls you to the bottom. In this context, there are quite a lot of questions as to why Alan doesn't drown in Massive Iron. Maybe the writers are giving hints about the personal qualities of the characters? Let's say, a test by water. Well, write your impressions of the House of the Dragon Restart in the comments. See you again in the expanses of Westeros.